Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the third audiocast of the classic platformer trilogies that came out on the PlayStation 2 era. The Ratchet Clank collection came out for the PlayStation 3 some years ago, and I really like that gold. As you can see, though, I don't have the original artwork. I purchased this game used at a GameStop for about $20 a couple of years ago, which is a bargain if you consider the price that it's at now. But, you know, just the discount, like so. I plan to maybe print out the original cover just to cut it out and put it back there eventually. Believe it or not, this was actually not the first Ratchet Clank series of games that I played. The first Ratchet Clank game I actually played was Future Tools of Destruction. I picked this up pretty early on in the PlayStation 3's lifespan, and I loved it. I loved everything about it, and then I had to get the PlayStation 2 era games, because during the PlayStation 2, I didn't get too many platformers. All those PlayStation 2 platformers I ended up getting for the PlayStation 3 instead. They do look better on the PlayStation 3 anyway, so, yeah. Downgrading, though, when I played the first Ratchet & Clank, I was a bit contentious with some of the gameplay designs of the first one, but I can understand why, because it is their first one of the series, and it came out in the early 2000s. Ratchet could not strafe in the first game, which was contentious for me, but I can understand why. The first one is probably the most reminiscent, the most similar to another trilogy of platformers that came out for the PlayStation 1, created by the same company, Insomniac. You probably remember a certain purple dragon named Spyro. Spyro's games had him traveling between worlds to do stuff. There were side little areas where you can gain bonus stuff like dragon eggs or orbs if you're playing Rift's Rage. And that type of idea is retained in the first Ratchet & Clank PS2 game. You have the spaceship instead of just flying with Spyro. You have the Ratchet spaceship that you take from world to world to world. You get a little bit of a little cutscene introduction when you enter each planet, and you can run through the linear platformer planet, and there might be some side areas that you could go to do some side stuff. For example, there is a racing side thing on the second planet involving a certain surfer dude sounding dude that says dude a lot. There was another, there's a, wow, my memory sucks when it comes to the first one. I blocked a lot of that out. But in terms of gameplay, it was different from the latter editions. Going Commando, the second Ratchet & Clank game, is similar to the PS3 era games. It's similar to the PS4 game. It might even be similar to the PS5 game, because they found their gameplay niche. They found their stride with the second one. The first one was that prototype mold. They wanted to get in there and get started, and it shows that it was the first one. It just shows. The PS4 one was a remake of this first one. Gameplay-wise, I would say it's better, because of course it is. They've had almost a dozen games to perfect the gameplay by that point, so of course the gameplay would be fun. But the story is probably lesser than the first one, at least in my opinion. The weapons were also bare bones. I don't think even Mr. Zircon was in the first one. Mr. Zircon is probably the best gadget, at least to me. He had so many funny lines. Mr. Zircon exists only to kill. For example, that line. He had dozens. And he was a recurring gadget in the later games. I don't know if he was in 2. I think he was definitely in 3. and then they just kept him in for future installments. There was a Sheepinator. The Sheepinator is like this gag type of weapon. They put at least one gag type of weapon in each of these games. The Sheepinator would turn people into sheep. You turn people into sheep. That's the point of the Sheepinator. Apt naming. You had the basic pistol type weapon. You had the basic bomb you would throw as this sort of bomb ahead of you to hit the enemy. It wasn't as accurate as the pistol, but it did more damage. You had a rocket launcher type weapon. You didn't have as much ammo. Yes, let's talk about that. In the Spyro trilogy, Spyro's flame breath was innate. You had no limit of that. But in the Ratchet Clank series, every single weapon, well, most every single weapon, the Sheepinator I don't think had ammo limit, but most of the other weapons, like the pistol, the rocket launcher, the bombs, all of those had a set limit of ammo. So when you ran out, you couldn't use it anymore until you picked up more ammo, which would usually be scattered across the game world that you were on, or you could just pick up more from a shop, which they added. You know how Moneybags would be in the Spyro games, and you would buy things from him? Well, they took that idea and just gave you a full-blown shop where you could spend your... Well, in the Ratchet Clank games, you don't have gems. You have these little bolts, the nuts and bolts that you blow up enemies and boxes and all sorts of things in the terrain to collect. This is your game currency. You would use this to purchase upgrades to your weapons. You would use this to purchase ammo for your weapons. And it's just an overall simplistic idea. The first game, introduced this concept, and it worked fine. But it was also the most bare bones, because of course it was. It was the first game. Ratchet couldn't strafe, so of course it was also pretty difficult to hit the enemies, especially the final boss. The final boss was an annoying nightmare, point of rantatious contention to me. I had finished Future Tools of Destruction before playing this first one on the Ratchet Clank PS3 collection, and the downgrade in gameplay really bothered me, the lack of strafing, and the fact that I redid that boss fight, that final boss fight, dozens of times until I finally managed to do it, figure it out. I found every other boss in this entire franchise to be far easier than the final boss in the first game, mostly because of the limitations of the first game's controls, obviously. But when they reached Going Commando, though, the second game in the trilogy, they had hit their stride. They had hit that gameplay niche that they ended up making every future installment of this series about. For example, the strafing was introduced here, the core combat was introduced here. If you played the combat in this, and then you put in Ratchet Clank 3, the gameplay didn't change too much. The gameplay didn't change too much at all in Future Tools of Destruction. It changed a little bit in Quest for Booty, because you didn't have Clank anymore. It changed a little bit more in Crack in Time, but that core gameplay concept was still there from the start of Going Commando to all the way up to Into the Nexus that I played. And I believe it's the same in the PS4 movie tie-in. Yes, the PS4 remake is a movie tie-in, which the movie is a remake of the first game. It is a movie of the first game's story. So, the PS4 game is a remake movie tie-in of the first game. It sounds confusing when I say it, of course. Whenever I say something, of course it sounds confusing. But Going Commando had a lot more to do in the game compared to the first game. You had these gladiator series of side missions where you could gain experience, because in Going Commando they introduced a form of experience growth system for your health. I believe in the first game you had a set number of hits until you went down. In the second game, all the way up to the latest games, they changed that. Your hits were connected to a certain experience system, kind of like an RPG. The more times you bonk enemies, the more times you hit enemies, the more times you shoot and pew and all that other stuff, your HP would go up, so you could take more hits in battle. So by the end of the game, you would have, like, a dozen times more HP than you did at the start. So if you were ever to replay the first world with your end game health, you could let the enemies hit you a lot of times and you wouldn't go down. Which is the point of having more health, to take more hits. You had lots of side quests in this, and they were actually pretty fun. You had this desert planet where you could collect certain things that you could sell to a merchant for bolts, which you could then use to trade for upgrades to your weapons, for ammo, and this core gameplay would be carried over into the third game, Up Your Arsenal. The gameplay would not change. The only things that would change would be the gadgets, the weapons that you could pick up. Some of them would return. That pistol, the combustor, would always return. You would always get that in almost every installation of the game. It's a trademark classic. It's the Ratchet's default weapon. Though in Deadlocked, he had the dual combustors, 2 guns that you get to shoot at the same time. You never get to do that again. By the way, did you know that Deadlocked was also released for the PlayStation 3? It's digital, but you can pick it up when you purchase a digital copy of Full Frontal Assault Ratchet Clank. You will get a free copy of Deadlocked, which was released for the PlayStation 2, which was often titled Ratchet 4. You can also collect Quest for Booty for free if you purchase a digital copy of Into the Nexus, or a brand new hard copy of the PS3 game, Into the Nexus. I would recommend you get the digital version, because the hard copies tend to be all used now, and the Quest for Booty was a download voucher code instead of being included on the disc. With that out of the way, let's keep going with the gameplay. The Going Commando picked up the story of what happened in the first game, but the story is a lot more in-depth. They changed some of the voice actors. You would notice this with Ratchet, especially. I think it's for the better, in my personal opinion. I think it's for the better. The new Ratchet voice actor, Going Commando, would go on to voice Ratchet for all the other games. I think he's still voicing for the PlayStation 5 game as well. They had Gladiator Survival side quests that you could do that they would end up recurring in Up Your Arsenal, Future Tools of Destruction. It was also Into the Nexus. I'm not sure if it was in Crack Time. I think it was. They usually had a certain type of Gladiator or survival side mission in every main installation in this series. They usually did. Because it was pretty much the one way you could gain a lot of experience points to get higher HP, things like that, real quick. You can get bolts as prizes, you can get all sorts of stuff, all sorts of goodies. In Up Your Arsenal, I believe this is where the gameplay hit its stride perfectly. Everything was crisp, everything was responsive. the aspect ratio was also fixed, because if you had sometimes for your television screen, if you played Going Commando on your PlayStation 3 collection, the aspect ratio would be different compared to Up Your Arsenal and the first Ratchet & Clank game. This Going Commando was like this one game that had a strange type of aspect ratio, and you had to tinker with your television screen, because I don't know if it's for all television screens, but for mine it did this. I had a CRT at the time. So I had to tinker with my aspect ratio in order to see the full screen, because the top part of this screen where it showed Ratchet's like health bar and things of that nature, that was cut off. I wasn't able to see it. It was like the game screen was zoomed in, and I couldn't zoom it out, and there's nothing in the settings to do anything about it. That is a point of contentious rantatiousness from me. If I'm being honest, I don't know if it's the game's fault, I don't know if it's my television screen's fault. I should probably try this game out on my new television. I don't have a CRT, where I have finally upgraded, because the CRT broke and I had to. If it never broke, I probably wouldn't have upgraded, but semantics. So, there was the aspect ratio issue with Going Commando. It was fixed, though, in Up Your Arsenal. I never noticed this issue on the old CRT with Up Your Arsenal. The aspect ratio was completely fixed, and I could see everything fine. It wasn't zoomed in like Going Commando was. If I had one thing to rant about with Going Commando, it would be that. In Up Your Arsenal, I don't think I have anything to rant about. Everything was crisp. Everything was good. Everything was fun. The Quark platformer little mini-games were very fun. The levels were fun. I don't think there were as many, though, but the worlds were bigger, though, so I guess that's why there weren't as many, because there was just more to do in the worlds that you could visit. But if I had one thing to pick at, would be that in Going Commando you had two worlds where you can like do this main time extensive side quest where you can collect certain things to trade for bolts, and you could get a lot of money that way. In Up Your Arsenal, there was only one world that did this. In Going Commando, you had two, so I guess that would be the only point of contention there, because I actually liked those worlds where you could collect those MacGuffins to trade in for those other things, because it just offered more stuff to do. While Up Your Arsenal was an improvement in every area, it was also slightly less things to do. I guess this might have been because of the development time. I am unsure of the development window between the second installment and the third installment, but I do believe it was less time between those two than it was between the first installment and the second installment. But that's just my theory. Overall, the Ratchet & Clank platformer trilogy has very little for me to pick at, if I say so myself. Each sequel actually got better than the previous one, in many ways. While 3 might have had less of the thing I liked in the second game, it was still an improvement in almost every way outside of that. And I would say that Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction is an improvement in almost every way from Up Your Arsenal, in my opinion. And I would say that that trend continued with Crack in Time, though I have things to gripe about with that one as well. You see, this is almost 20 minutes, and usually these audiocasts are 30 minutes, so we are going to have a lightning round. I'm going to talk about the other games in this series, since the others don't have too many other games. Sly had a 4th game. I didn't play it, though, so I plan to play it, but I don't have it, so I can't talk about it. I have all of the other Ratchet & Clank games, so I can't talk about it. So let's talk about Deadlocked. I don't have a hard copy to show you this. So, just imagine that you're looking at Deadlocked right now, but you're not. You're looking at the Ratchet Clank collection, but just imagine you're looking at Deadlocked, an image of Deadlocked right now. In Deadlocked, you'll notice that it's called Ratchet Deadlocked, not Ratchet and Clank, and that is on purpose because Clank is not playable. Clank is not part of Ratchet's team. You're playing primarily as Ratchet, and it's mostly, if you remember the gladiator-type side quests in Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal, they were very popular. People really loved them. Well, imagine they made a whole game surrounding that gladiatorialness. That's what Deadlocked is. It's one big gladiator game with the story thrown in. It's not as story exclusive, big as Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal, but I would say there's more story in this than the first game. At least to me, there was a little bit more. The weapons were very fun. They weren't as many, but you had the dual combusters, which I really liked. The strafing mode was locked. It was constant strafing mode. You had far more of a point of gameplay focused on gunplay rather than getting to use his wrench. I forgot to talk about his wrench. Consider his wrench kind of like Spyro's horn attack. The wrench is a physical move that doesn't require any ammo. You can bonk anybody you want. There's a simple 2 to 3 hit combo that you can use with the wrench, which is short ranged, and if you're in a pinch and you have no ammo left, just use that. Primarily, we use the wrench to blow up any boxes containing bolts. That's usually what I did. But you can use it to hit the enemies. You could bonk the enemies if you wanted, if you needed to. It's useful, it's just not as strong. I would say the damage that the wrench does is about on par with the combuster without upgrading it. Though I think you can upgrade the wrench at some point. Upgrading the wrench would upgrade the damage that the wrench can do. But yeah, there's that. So the wrench didn't have too big of a shine in Deadlocked. But overall, I have nothing bad to say about Deadlocked. I would just say that it's not as open as the previous 3 games are, because it's true, it's not. So if I would say, if they were keeping up the consistency of getting better with each installment, Deadlocked wasn't better, but it wasn't worse. It was on that balanced level. I don't have any rantatious things I could say about Deadlocked. But, okay, I actually have one thing I could say. There were a lot of timed missions in Deadlocked. If you know me, if anybody knows me, I hate time limits. Time limits in absolutely anything ever makes me very upset. They make me feel rushed. I have to rush. I feel like I have to rush. I can't stop and look at the gameplay developments. I can't stop and look at the graphics. I can't stop and look at anything. I have to rush through. It's like a time trial at Crash. Only it might be a little bit more fair than a time trial at Crash, to be granted. But it's still a time limit, and I hate that. And a lot of missions in Deadlocked, I believe, were timed. Mostly to keep the fans happy, because, Ratchet was on TV or something, and he had to bonk the enemies and appease the fans within a certain time limit, because if he took too long, the fans would get bored, and they would start booing, and then he would have his little explosive collar blow up or something, whatever. So Deadlocked was Deadlocked. Up next was the true sequel, which is the true Ratchet Clank 4. Deadlocked is more like an expansion to Up Your Arsenal to me, personally. Deadlocked is more an expansion, but it was a fun game. Ratchet and Clank Future, though, was like the true Ratchet Clank 4, at least to me. This was, I believe, it was a launch title for the PlayStation 3, and it was a very fun game. It was very consistent with Up Your Arsenal and Going Commando. The gameplay was crisp, the graphics was clear, everything popped in really well. There was no screen tearing, there was no frame lag, there was none of that stuff. Everything looked great. the in-engine cutscenes, the CGI out-of-engine cutscenes, it was all crisp and clear. You can really tell that they had a lot more oomph to the hardware that they could work on with this. It felt like a PlayStation 3 game. It felt like an upgrade. It felt like that next stage in gameplay. And I think that's what Ratchet & Clank tends to do best. They tend to show gameplay that is on the level of the hardware that it was released on. For example, Ratchet & Clank, the first one, showed what the PS2 could do. Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction showed what the PS3 could do. Ratchet & Clank, the remake movie tie-in, showed what the PS4 could do. And now Ratchet & Clank for the PS5 is showing what the PS5 could do. And I guess Spyro showed what the PS1 could do. But Insomniac is really good at this stuff. They're really good. They're really consistent with what they make in that regards. Future Tools of Destruction keeps to the course of what Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal were about. They have a list of worlds you could visit. They have one world in particular where you could do a side mission where you collect some stuff to trade for bolts. They had that from Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal. There was one world where you could do it, but it was a very big world where you could do it in. And it was a very fun world that you could do it in. You had a merchant which you can trade for stuff. You could upgrade your guns through using them this time. The more you used a gun, the better it got. I believe that's how it was in Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal too, if I remember correctly. I don't think that's how it was in the first one, but hey, it was the first one. Now we're on Future Tools of Destruction. The story really kicks off in this one. We have a new storyline here, which focuses on Ratchet and his origins of the Lombaxes. You will have noticed that we don't talk about his origins or his kind or anything like that. In the previous trilogy, he's just the hero guy. But now he has a big backstory type thing where we can delve into the character and delve into where he's been and delve into his bond with Clank, which we've seen shine really well in the first game, and it continued to stay strong in the second and third game, but this one is where it really, really felt it. You really felt it. And when a certain thing happens at the end of this game, it reaches into the tie-in game Quest for Booty. I told you how to collect that. You have to get into the Nexus, buy it digitally, and you'll get Quest for Booty for free. Or you could just grab a hard copy of the European PAL version, which will work on any PlayStation 3 system, because HDMI is universal, region free. So you could do that if you wanted to. If you wanted. It might be cheaper. But anyways, Quest for Booty was more of the same Future Tools of Destruction. The gameplay wasn't too much different, but you'll notice that Clank was no longer with you. When Clank was no longer with you, Ratchet no longer had that double jump type of thing with Clank's like jetpack or whatever, the little helicopter propellers for the second double jump, so Ratchet only had his first jump. You'll notice that the guns aren't as readily available. You don't get as many as the other games, because this is more like, it feels more like an expansion, a tie-in to Crack in Time than a full-blown game, but it's still worth playing because because of the pirates that you meet in Future Tools of Destruction. Those pirates, the captain and his first mate. Oh, they're so funny. They're so amazing. And they are the main villains in the second game, Quest for Booty. They are the main villains, and it is amazing. At least to me, it was amazing. I loved that little story arc the first mate goes through. Oh. And then, finally, after you complete Quest for Booty, you will go into a Crack in Time. In a Crack in Time, this is where the gameplay fully shines into its own. It becomes full-bred PlayStation 3 powerhouse. It shows you the true power. It's like Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction meets Super Mario Odyssey. It's basically like that, because you have the main worlds, the main large worlds, which feel like main levels in Future Tools of Destruction, things of that nature. But then you also have these moons, which are a lot smaller, which you can go to. It feels like the tiny little planets in Super Mario Odyssey. And there's various platformer puzzles that you can do there. There's certain mini-games that you can do on those little moons. It felt like a mix of Tools of Destruction and Super Mario. At least to me, okay? At least to me. You had these little go-go boots that Ratchet could put on to make him go fast. This is the one where I think it's not an improvement over Future Tools of Destruction in every way. In many ways, it is. In terms of gameplay, ease of combat, ease of all of that stuff. Yes. On every level of that. Yes, it's an improvement. It feels great. It plays great. Everything's smooth. It's sweet. But, at least to me, the content suffers. There's not as many worlds. There's like 8 or something like that. Less than 10. In Future Tools of Destruction, there was like 20 or something. And they were all pretty fun. They were all pretty sizable. They weren't as big, okay? The worlds that you could visit here are huge. They're massive. They're just... You could fly through them just as fast as you could fly through these. And once you do, that's it, man. It felt like it wasn't as long as this, but it felt like a satisfying finale, if that makes sense. It feels like it wasn't as lengthy in content and girth of what you could do, but it was satisfying at the same time, if that makes sense. So, if I were to give this like the A+, I would give this like the A. It's not a down pat in that. It's just my personal gripe, okay? My history with the Ratchet and Clank series comes from my love for Spyro. Platformers were what I did on the PlayStation 1. Fighting games were what I did on the PlayStation 2 before I found JRPGs, which then became what I did on the PlayStation 2 and then the PlayStation 3. But Ratchet and Clank was my reintroduction to platformers as a college-going individual. Ratchet and Clank was like my reintroduction into those types of games, and it recaptured something for me. It recaptured a spark of something that I never want to lose, no matter how old I get. I want to keep that spark of just that light-hearted enjoyment of just everything that these games represent. You have serious moments, but overall you have that thrill, that thirst for adventure, that light-hearted fun that almost every single installment represents to a T. Sly didn't have that too strongly, but it did have it. Jack had it in the first game, but lost it in Jak 2 and 3. They became very edgy. They're good games, but they became edgy. But the Ratchet and Clank never lost it. From the first installment all the way up to into the Nexus that I've played, it kept that vibe, that level of fun that never lost itself in this series. And it seems to me that they still haven't lost it on the PlayStation 5, a new Ratchet & Clank game. I would recommend, if you have seen the PlayStation 5 Ratchet & Clank game and you're interested in it, I would strongly recommend picking up this first. The Ratchet & Clank collection, the first 3 games. I would highly recommend you get this first. then play the future trilogy. I highly recommend you play these two especially. If you want Quest for Booty, definitely get that. Into the Nexus is also a very good one. It's not as long. It's probably about half the length of Tools of Destruction, but it's still very solid. It's still very fun. It's still got a good gameplay feel. It's got a new gameplay feel. They try to do something new while keeping it the same. And that's what I loved about this series. It was consistent. They kept it. If you played Going Commando, and then you put Into the Nexus, you would not be lost in terms of gameplay. It felt the same, but it just did that little bit different. That little bit different that made it feel like it was worth playing. It was worth doing. And that's what I loved about this series. That's what I loved about it. The consistency. And I hope it never loses it. I hope it never loses it. This has been an audiocast about Ratchet and Clank. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, be imaginative.